Welcome back, everybody. Are you ready for some more from Valentine Lowe's Courtiers? Now, this part had me laugh and cry. It concerns Martin Charteris, who became the Queen's private secretary in 1972. He joined the royal household in 1950 as Princess Elizabeth's private secretary. When she became queen in 1952, he served as her assistant private secretary for 20 years, the longest serving person to hold that position. According to Heseltine, he was the best private secretary the Queen ever had. According to Heseltine and most everyone else, he had good judgment, charm, political sensitivity, and high-spirited good humor. It is said that he was always in love with the Queen and never stopped. When Martin Charteris retired at the end of 1977 and was to have the customary audience with the Queen brought Princess Anne with her because the Queen knew that Princess Anne would not tolerate tears from her mother, and the Queen knew there would be tears. The Queen did not cry, but Martin Charteris did. The Queen gave him a silver tray, and he told her that the next time anyone sees the tray, it will have a gin and tonic on it. He was her friend and courtier. When Martin Charteris was in hospital dying of cancer in 1999, the Queen went to visit him, and they spoke for an hour about current topics, as she knew that was what he wanted, to talk about the things they talked about when he was working for her. He was a sculptor in his spare time, and in the last year of his life, he spent all his time making a cast iron fireback for the Queen. She placed it in St. George's Hall in Windsor Castle, where it remains to this day. So that was part of chapter 2, something which I was a little too emotional about and did not add to the previous video. In chapter 3, we get a glimpse into the then Prince Charles's younger years, particularly 1966, when he was sent to Australia to attend Timbertop. Squadron leader Dave Checkett had already spent 5 years working for Prince Philip and was then persuaded to stay on and look after Charles. Checkett relocated his family to Australia to a place called Devon Farm, where Charles stayed with him over weekends, etc. Prince Charles settled in better and faster than expected, and weekends he picnicked and went fishing with the Checkett's family, and so on, and he even got time to play a little polo. After 6 months, they returned to Britain. Checkett was supposed to return to the RAF, but Prince Philip persuaded him to stay on as Charles's equerry, and later, after 1970, as his first private secretary. Checkett was not an aristocrat and did not have a family history of royal service, but him and Charles had become friends. So, all's well that ends well. Unfortunately, not. Checkett may have been a friend and was indeed supportive, but he also had a job to do, and Charles was not always easy to deal with. When Heseltine suggested he has an informal meeting with local reporters at the beginning of his first term at Trinity College, Charles wasn't happy. He also refused to wear a college gown for the photographs and bombarded Checkett with requirements and demands for the meeting. When he was asked to present a trophy at a celebrity golf tournament, he wrote in a note to Checkett, "I'm sorry, but I only agreed to donate this idiotic trophy on the clear understanding that I would not have to present it or go anywhere near a golf match. By the late 1970s, Chequers had become critical of Charles's conduct, and Charles, without Chequers knowing, found himself another secretary. Charles blamed Chequers for a disorganized office and said he no longer needed a nanny, and Chequers left an embittered man. Then there was Michael Colburn, whom Charles met while they were both serving on the destroyer HMS Norfolk in 1971. In 1974, Charles wrote to Colburn and asked him to retire from the Navy and become his personal secretary. As a personal secretary instead of a private secretary, Colburn became staff and a member of the household. As such, Colburn was often at the receiving end of Charles's outbursts and rages, but nothing like what was to come after Charles married Diana. The book tells of the incident of Diana finding the bracelet Charles ordered for Camilla before their wedding, a package with a gift of jewelry for all Charles's friends arrived at the office, and among those was an inscribed bracelet for Camilla. It was inscribed with the letters GF. At the time, Diana had a desk in Colburn's office. At one point, Colburn was called out of the office, and Diana decided to look at the gifts herself. Diana was very upset and rushed out of the office, nearly knocking another secretary over. The book also tells a little about the honeymoon on the royal yacht Britannia and how difficult that was, with Charles spending much of his time reading and Diana desperate for his attention. Then they moved on to Balmoral, which was even worse. Charles spent his time shooting, reading, fishing, and painting, while Diana was bored, weepy, and depressed. At one point, Charles summoned Colburn to Balmoral to spend the day with Diana while he went out hunting. Colburn spent more than 7 hours in the drawing room with Diana. She was crying and told Colburn how unhappy she was. They even had sandwiches sent in to them. That evening, before they boarded the royal train, Colburn heard Charles and Diana have a massive fight. Then Charles appeared and threw something at Colburn, which he just managed to catch. It was Diana's wedding ring. Charles told Colburn that it no longer fitted Diana and he had to arrange to have it adjusted. On the drive to Aberdeen, Charles continued his tirade, complaining about the new Range Rover, which was not to his specification, how everything was Colburn's fault, and everything Colburn did was wrong. Once on the train, Colburn was again summoned to Charles's compartment, where he spent the next 5 hours listening to Charles talk about the catastrophe of his marriage. By 1983, Colburn had enough. They were on the Britannia once again during Charles and Diana's tour of Canada when Charles exploded and accused Colburn of spending more time with Diana than with him. Charles spent 15 minutes kicking furniture, shouting at Colburn, and unbeknown to them, Diana was outside the door listening to every word and crying. Colburn wrote to Charles stating that he had been under the impression that by helping Diana, he was also helping Charles. But basically, that was it. Charles was shocked by Colburn's resignation, and Charles and other members of staff tried to persuade him to stay, but it was too late. Diana and Charles's private secretary, Edward Adine, did not get along. She found him to be a fuddy-duddy, and he could not deal with her more informal way of doing things. Edward was old school, and Charles did not want someone telling him what he could not do. He wanted a yes man, someone who would agree with him. Edward became increasingly frustrated that Charles would not listen to him. So shortly after Colburn left, Edward Dean also handed in his notice. Now, chapter 4 deals with the Queen Mother's staff and particularly about the time she lived at Clarence House. It stands in complete contrast to what I read about Charles and his staff. It was a household in which no one would ever dream of kicking the furniture or shouting. The Queen Mother was described by staff in later years as a woman of kindness and gentle humour. I'm now chapters ahead, and although the picture painted by Valentine Lowe is not always a pretty one, I still commend him for the way he keeps his narrative balanced and shows a measure of empathy, not only for the staff, but also for the royals. And I love the way he seeked out the humorous things, and when things get a little too heavy in the book, there is, so far, also something to giggle about on the next page, like the Queen Mother showing staff how to flip peas into a chandelier bowl. I'm just about less than halfway through, and I hope the book stays like this. So far, I highly recommend it as a good and fun read.